let's start with the big one. The assassinate. Well, we don't know if it's an assassination of the daughter, if it's a foiled or a bungled assassination of the father, of a Russian philosopher and aide to Trump. What the heck, Robert? Let me give us the rundown, your theory as to whether or not they were targeting the daughter or the father and hit the daughter, and what are going to be the repercussions of this. Is this going to be like a Archduke Franz Ferdinand that's going to dive the world into World War III?
Not likely. So Dugin has been called the Alex Jones of Russia, and that's probably analogous. Political philosopher who's had a range of perspectives, and is, well, he's less influential in Russia than Alex Jones is in the United States, but a sort of independent thinker. He's called a Eurasian thinker. We'll get into one of the people that has studied him the most is Matthew Millerman, a Canadian political philosopher who is our sidebar guest this week. So that ended up being apt timing, coincidental timing. But so in the West and in Ukraine and amongst the intelligence services and your State Department crowd, they obsess over Dugin and they think Dugin is Putin's brain and Putin's out. There's no evidence of that. He's not that influential within Russia, outside of eclectic intellectual circles. He's not part of the Putin regime. Putin's not close to him. None of those stories are accurate. And that's why I won't trigger or precipitate any kind of specific reaction of that kind. I think the greater concern within Russia won't be that this will happen to Dugin. It will be that this happened to anyone in Russia if it turns out Ukraine is responsible. That they're using Chechen tactics from the early 2000s of engaging in domestic terror, with which Russia and Putin have specific and particular and detailed knowledge. So that's the risk of escalation. It appears Dugin was the target, maybe with his daughter. His daughter is also a journalist, commentator, as well as he is. They were supposed to both be in the car, and apparently there was an internal car bomb that was meant to go off with both of them in it. By pure coincidence, he wasn't in it. Apparently, he was in another car right behind her, so he saw his daughter blown up and killed, to which a bunch of people in Ukraine were celebrating. So a bunch of pro-Ukrainian types in the West were celebrating. So, I mean, it's very disturbing, the ongoing basis we see that the people in the West who, in their name of hating Putin, have justified some of the most morally horrendous acts we've seen in recent times in these kind of conflicts. So but it won't lead to much change in Russia's strategy. Russia will pay a little bit more attention to the risk of domestic terror. They already had been. They broke up a plot a couple of months ago where there was an effort by Ukrainian saboteurs to kill a prominent journalist. One concern is that Dugin was on a prominent list that had been a NATO-endorsed list. That was a blacklist. And the question now is, was this just a blacklist for censorship purposes, or has this now become a blacklist for assassination purposes? Because prior, as Alex Christoforou of the Duran, which people can find at the duran.locals.com, has been documenting, several people on that list have been getting killed over the last 6 weeks. So Senator Rand Paul is on that list. Glenn Greenwald is on that list. So the greater concern is there's a long history of blowback where the CIA and Western intelligence agencies invoke terroristic insurgencies for short-term political purposes, and it blows back by not being able to control these. Whether it's, you can look at Operation Gladio and how it went AWOL in Europe in the 70s and 80s, what was supposed to be a stay-behind army to fight a Soviet invasion became a domestic terror campaign throughout large parts of Europe. They went to great efforts to suppress that, but were not fully successful in doing so. Obviously, with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, with embracing the Muslim Brotherhood at times throughout the Arab world, including during the Obama administration at times, the so-called Arab Spring that backfired in Egypt and Tunisia and elsewhere, and Libya most prominently. So the greater concern that I see is not that Russia will take some extreme reaction to this. It is more that we now may have an out of control, neo-Nazi aligned terroristic regime that won't limit itself and restrict itself in the ways that the people who put them in motion may have wanted initially. And there should have been immediate condemnation by the Biden administration when that list was put out. There should be immediate condemnation of this assassination of a young woman in Russia and Moscow. There should be immediate condemnation that Glenn Greenwald and Rand Paul are on that list.
Who put together that list, Robert?
Ukrainian authorities did, with the backing and support of NATO-aligned groups.
And the purpose of the list, was it not a persona non grata, or was it something that was intended to?
It was. There are people who wondered what the purpose of the list was. I mean, basically, the list was, here are your Russian propagandists who are really in aid of the Russian government, right? So they're accusing Senator Rand Paul of this. But some people at the time were concerned it would go beyond censorship, and now there's evidence that maybe it is, that someone at least is taking that list, maybe even not without official sanction, and has decided to pull it. But to pull off a murder in Moscow of at least a semi-prominent individual is disconcerting. It shows a degree of sophistication that is 9/11-ish.
Well, or I mean, just the hypothesize. It's not inconceivable. It's some form of organized crime, some sort of infighting, some sort of internal corruption. It's not like
extremely unlikely, because Dugin's not that big within Russia, and nor is he that controversial within Russia. He's kind of an eclectic political philosopher who's had a range of ideas at different times, who mostly is studied in the West. Now Ukraine obsesses over him, but he's not in a bunch of political, nor is his daughter in a bunch of internal political fights of that kind. So extremely unlikely that it's internal. Most likely it's external.
Who else was on that list, Robert? Not that we would expect anything like this on American soil, but it was don't come to
the big one was Senator Rand Paul and Glenn Greenwald. Those were the two big ones that I remember right off the top of my head. There are others too, but those are two of the big ones.
Comment creator says, "Hey, Smile, I'm scared to even move. I don't know what cable is going to pop out of the whatever." Okay, that's very interesting. I guess moving on, people were saying Gonzalo Lira had a great show earlier today. I didn't see it, so I don't know.
I'm sure Warlord was on there. A bunch of people were on there, so there was a range of discussion, a roundtable discussion, where people can follow up there. Otherwise, my view is I always follow the Duran as the best place to get continuous updates on the Ukrainian conflict, especially. But yeah, in the weaponization of crazy things, the attempts of all the liberal legal scholars this week to pretend that they could put Trump in prison is the latest bit of liberal leftist inanity as it concerns Trump.